Is the screen visible?
Professor, it is visible. Good evening.
Thanks for the confirmation.
Welcome to our subsection webinar series, Professor. We're very glad that you accepted our invitation.
Thank you. Thank you again for the invitation.
I am the chair, Dr. Bindu Thomas.
Pleasure to meet you.
Bindu ma'am, can we start?
Namrata, please go on.
Okay. Arpita, can you start?
Ma'am.
Arpita?
A very good evening to all of you present here today. I'm Arpita Prakash from the National Institute of Engineering IEEE Student Branch, and it's an honor to be the host for today's event. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our dignitaries, members, and students who've joined in for the webinar Advanced Biometric Technique, IEEE Mysuru subsection, in association with the IEEE Bangalore section and the Information Theory Society Bangalore chapter. I request all participants to stay muted for the smooth conduction of the event. All questions and discussions will be taken up towards the end of our session. I would like to take this opportunity to share the legacy of our IEEE Mysuru subsection. The IEEE Mysuru subsection is one among the 3 subsections under the IEEE Bangalore section. It was by Ms. Susan K. Resident 2021 and inducted by Mr. Puneet Kumar Mishra, Chair, IEEE Bangalore section on the 21st of December 2020. The event was graced by the presence of key leaders of IEEE Region 10. The subsection family includes Mysuru, Mandya, Hassan, Kodagu, and Chamarajanagar districts. It has within its folds 26 engineering colleges, 14 IEEE student branches, and more than 1,000 IEEE members. The nomination committee for IEEE Bangalore section, Mr. Keshav Bhatt, presented the slate on IEEE Mysuru subsection as follows. Chair Dr. Bindu A. Thomas, Chair-elect Dr. Parameshachari BD, Vice Chair Dr. Sudarshan Patil Kulkarni, Secretary Dr. Radhakrishna Rao KA, and Treasurer Dr. Archana NB, along with 17 Execom members. The subsection aims to conduct myriad student and professional activities such as invited talks, student internships, workshops, flagship conferences, other outcome-based events. It intends to enhance professional networking, humanitarian activities, and to stay updated with the latest technologies. Hope we receive all the success in all the future endeavors. Moving forth, I'd like to introduce and welcome the esteemed dignitaries who've joined us today. I'm extremely privileged to welcome the resource person for today's webinar, Dr. Vincenzo Piuri, IEEE Region A Director-elect for 2021-22, ACM Distinguished Scientist, Professor of Italy. A very special welcome to you, sir. I heartily welcome Dr. Bindu A. Thomas, Chair of IEEE Mysuru subsection and Professor and Head of Department of ECE, VVIT Mysuru. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Parameshachari BD, Chair-elect IEEE Mysuru subsection and Professor and Head of the Department of ECE, GSSS IETW Mysuru. A cordial welcome to you. Immense pleasure to welcome all the Execom members, event coordinators, and all the participants who are here with us today. I'd now take this opportunity today, Dr. Vincenzo Piuri. Dr. Piuri is a full professor of computer engineering at the University of Milan, Italy. He has been an associate professor at Polytechnic of Milan, Italy, his alma mater, from where he received his PhD in computer engineering. His main research interests lie in artificial intelligence, intelligence systems, pattern analysis and recognition, signal and image processing, biometrics, and cloud computing infrastructures, to name a few. His original results 100 international journals, proceedings of international conferences, and books. He is an IEEE Fellow and a senior member of the International Neural Network Society. He is the president of the IEEE Systems Council 2021, IEEE Region 8 Director-elect for 2021-22. He has graced the position of president of IEEE Computational Intelligence Society, IEEE Vice President for Technical Activities, IEEE Director Education of the IEEE Biometrics Council, among many more influential posts. He was the editor-in-chief of the IEEE Systems Journal from 2015 to 19. He has been the associate editor of IEEE Transactions on Computers, Neural Networks, Instrumentation and Measurement before championing the position of IEEE editor of IEEE Transactions on Cloud Computing, which he holds currently. As an added feather in his cap, he was awarded the IEEE Instrumentation and Measurement and was inducted into the IEEE Technical Activities Board Hall of Honor. He has illuminated thousands of young minds as the visiting professor at the University of Texas, Austin, USA, and honorary professor at Obuda University, Hungary, Guangdong University of Petrochemical Technology, and at Northeastern University, China, Muran Institute of Technology, Japan, and at Amity University and Galgotius University in India. We're extremely honored to host you. Without further ado, and with eager minds, we will now begin our session. I request the participants to drop in any doubts they have in the chat box, and they will be taken up towards the end of the talk. I now request Dr. Piuri to take over the session.
Ladies and gentlemen, namaste. It's really a great pleasure and an honor for me to be with you this evening, at least by teleconference. And I really hope to be able to visit you in the near future. Today, I would like to talk about some advanced techniques for biometrics. This is a really emerging area that can be useful in a broad variety of applications. We are going to see this evening, first of all, what are the biometric traits, which are the issues that can lead to advanced approaches, and which are the issues that we need to address when we design a biometric system, so that we can have a better understanding of how we can use these technologies not only for very specific applications, for example, passport control or other type of applications like this, but also in our daily life to make our life much more comfortable and safe. Biometric traits are biometrics is a set of automatic techniques which allow for recognizing a person or a group of persons by using physiological or behavioral characteristics. Physiological characteristics are, for example, fingerprint, face, iris, and behavioral characteristics are the voice, the gait, the age, and other similar traits. For fingerprint, we are typically observing the surface of the fingertip, where we can see ridges and valleys, which are converging, diverging, and these characteristics of the fingertip are actually unique, almost unique for the individuals. For the face, we can typically recognize the people when we look to them in the face. So basically what we are doing here, we are extracting some basic characteristics, like, for example, the shape of the face, the position and the shape of the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and all this combined, these characteristic points of the face actually make us recognizing the people, and can be used to recognize the face of people by comparing the distribution of this characteristic point with what we have recorded in our database. For iris, what we can observe is that the stripes that we have in the iris are kind of unique for the individuals. And as a consequence, by analyzing their distribution in the iris, we can match the individuals with the information that we may have stored in the biometric database. Typically, we are not just matching the images as they are, but we are extracting some relevant features that can be much more easily compared and still are unique for the individuals. And the same for the retina, for the veins in the retina, for the geometry of the end, for the palm print, which is a generalization of the fingerprint analysis. We can also look to the veins in the hands, since these the veins, the distribution of the veins is pretty unique and is much more difficult to forge the distribution. For other biometric traits, we can try to mimic the individual. For example, for the fingerprint, we can use some silicon-based replica of the fingertip in order to replicate the distribution of the fingertip traits of another individual. But there are also countermeasurements that can be used to detect this kind of forgeries. The hair shape, the DNA is another pretty unique characteristic. The only problem is that doing the analysis of the DNA to compare and recognize the individuals is too expensive nowadays, and it takes some time. So it's not really feasible with the current technologies, but maybe in the future it will be much more affordable economically and much faster, so that this can be used also for real-time recognition of people. The voice, looking to the timbre, the distribution of the voice signal, this is kind of unique since it is associated to the shape of the mouth and to the other characteristics of the larynx and all the other part of the oral cavity, which create a specific timbre for the speech. Signature, keystroke, gait, posture, the gestures are not so unique, but can be used to have some understanding of the activity of the people. The gait can be used to understand if the person has some walking problems, for example. For the gesture, we can use the gesture for human system interface to translate the gesture in commands to the system. The emotion can be used as well, so that we do not recognize the face, but the emotion which is expressed by the face to understand the behavior, the attitude of the people, to understand the emotional state of the people, and as a consequence to use this information as an indicator of what is happening to the specific person. Age, gender, obviously are not unique of the people, but can help in understanding to which group an individual belongs. The biometric traits need to have some specific characteristics in order to be used in real-world applications. And in particular, the more we need to use a biometry to identify the person, the more we need to have everybody with that specific characteristic, with that specific biometric trait. For example, if someone is working in the fields, they may have the fingertip damaged by the tools that are used during the work in the fields. And as a consequence, in the rural areas, may be difficult to use at least in certain cases, the fingertip to identify uniquely a person. The more we need to identify uniquely the person, the more we need the uniqueness of the biometric trait, so that we can associate that biometric trait to the specific individual, and so on. And we have also other characteristics that should be considered when we choose the biometric trait and when we implement the biometric system. And here is a quick summary of the various characteristics that I mentioned for the various biometric traits. But what is important to point out is that when we need to identify someone, we can actually use different approaches. We can have a token, so we can have a card, an RFID, in general, an object that we can hold and show to be identified. Or we can use something that we know, login and password, for example. So we avoid to go around with objects, with the tokens. We just need to remember the login and password. But if we really want to have a very easy to use approach, we do prefer to consider the biometric techniques. So we just show what we are. We show the fingerprint, we show the face, or any other biometric trait which has a sufficient uniqueness to allow to identify the individual in a really unique way. How is working? Well, in the biometric approach, basically we have a pattern recognition process. We need to compare what we have recorded associated to the person to what we observe when we need to perform the identification. Basically, what we do is to collect the specific biometries, in this example, the fingertip. This biometry is obtained from the sensors, but we do not perform the match on the physical image. What we are typically doing in order to be more general, more reliable, and in order to be able to take into account possible inaccuracies in the traits that we have collected and still have a robust identification, what we are doing is just to extract from the image some features which are characteristic of that specific biometry. For example, if we look to the fingertip, we can observe that there are some characteristic points in which we have the convergence and the divergence of ridges and valleys. These are characteristic points which are called minutiae, and if we pinpoint these characteristic points, these minutiae, in the image of the fingertip, actually that distribution of the features of the characteristic points is unique, is really very unique for the individuals. So what we are doing as a consequence is to store the distribution of these points only on the fingertip. So basically we record only these positions, and this allows to perform later the comparison of the two fingertips by adjusting, rotating the images until we have the appropriate overlapping. So in order to do so, we take the image with these features that we have extracted, and we encode in an appropriate way these points, so that we create a template that we store in the database. And when we need to identify an individual, we need to certify that such an individual is exactly what he claims to be. The individual present again the fingertip. This is extracted from the image. We extract the same feature that we extracted during the enrollment, during the recording in the database, and we generate the encoded representation. At this point, we extract from the database the template associated to the individual, to who the individual claims to be, and then we perform a comparison of the two templates. If the two templates have sufficient matching, then the individual is identified. Typically, we have not just an exact identification, but since we may have some of the points which are missing, we may have some possible problems in our fingertip. So what we are doing is actually to have a minimum threshold for which the two templates need to be similar. And the lower is the threshold, the more we accept to recognize, to identify that person in an incorrect way. The higher is the threshold, the more we force the equality, the exact equality of the template. Another ways of using biometry is not for identifying a person to check if the person is exactly what he or she claims to be, but to recognize the person in a group of persons. So in this case, what we are doing is to extract from the database of the fingertip, of the representation of the fingertips, we are extracting the ones which have some sufficient similarity. And then we recognize the individual for which the similarity is the highest among the one that we have in the database. So basically, what we need to do is to set the value of the threshold for the identification and recognition according to the specific needs of the application. The higher is the threshold, the less we are accepting impostors, and but we also are misclassifying, misidentifying people who are genuine individuals. The lower is the threshold, the more we accept to recognize impostors, but on the other hand, we have the opportunity of significantly reducing the missing recognition of genuine people. Where we set the threshold? Well, it's really depending on the application. Since if the application really is critical, we may want to be very, very sure that the individual is not an impostor. So we accept to have to ask to an individual to try again in order to be recognized if the recognition fails, but we want really to limit the possible mistakes in the identification of impostors as people recognized in a positive way. So basically, we need to choose the value according to the specific type of application. What we can do with the biometric traits? Well, what we can do is actually to use the biometric traits to really identify an individual, so that we can understand which is the person, associate to the person the identity, and as a consequence use this identity to authorize access or to identify possible needs and preferences that we may have recognized in the past. And we can record additional needs and preferences for the future use. Or we can identify the group of to which the person belongs. The group of the young person, the group of the older person, woman, man, and so on. So that basically identify the type of the individual we can associate to the group of the individual to which the individual belong, we can associate some common needs, some common characteristics, some common preferences, and as a consequence, when we recognize a person belonging to this group, we can apply, we can configure the services as typically needed by that group. As example, what if we have an elder person that is walking, who is walking, and may need to cross the road, we may want to extend the time allowed to cross the road so that this person can cross in a more safe way. Or we can use, finally, the biometric traits to understand the actions. We can use the biometric traits like a gesture, for example, in order to give commands to the system. We can associate to a gesture a specific meaning, which is a command given to the system, which is observing the gesture. So in this case, we do not need actually to identify or recognize an individual, or to recognize the group to which an individual belongs, but we just need to understand the action of the person. And there are many emerging technologies in biometrics nowadays which try to address all these aspects in a much more natural way, so that it will be much easier to use these technologies in the daily life, in environments which are not really controlled, and as a consequence, we may not have the perfect environment to collect the biometry. What we wanted to do is to go in the direction of unconstrained or less constrained biometrics, so that we do not need to enforce the lighting, for example, in the environment, the positioning of the person in front of the sensors, in order to collect in the very accurate way the desired biometry. We want, for example, to consider contactless fingerprinting, contactless palm print, the ability of collecting the iris while I am moving around in an environment. Another huge area of research and practice, more and more, is nowadays the use of multi-biometrics. Instead of using one single biometry, more and more we are merging the information which pertain to different biometries. For example, I can consider the iris and the face, so that if I may not be 100% sure when I identify the face, I can increase the accuracy of my identification or recognition by considering also the other biometric traits. So basically, it's much more difficult that I have a low recognition or identification of individuals when I use two different biometries. When we consider face recognition, we have several challenges that we need to face nowadays. Since face recognition is very valuable, especially if I wanted to use the face recognition when I'm walking, or when I'm not really presenting my face in front of the camera, and as a consequence, I do want to have a much more free way of interacting with the environment and collect the biometry for the face. We have different pose of the face with respect to what may have been stored in the database, and I do not want to force the individual to stay still in front of the camera with a very good lighting projected on the face. I can ask for this, for example, for border control at the airport. but that is a very controlled environment, is an environment in which I really can increase the lighting of the face with appropriate lights on the side. I can ask the individual to stay still in front of the camera so that I get the face in the best and accurate way, in the most standard way with respect to the pose. And as a consequence, the extraction of the various features is very, very near to the standard that I may have captured in the database. In addition, we need to take into account that we may have a different expression. So the shape of the face is more or less the same, but some characteristics may not be exactly this one. I may not have, as I mentioned, a non-homogeneous illumination. So some part of the image may be much darker. The quality may not be perfect. And I may have aging effect. The face is actually changing year after year, since there are various aspects of the face, various features of the face, which may be affected by the age. The shape of the face may change, since I may have the chin, which is a little bit moving down. I may put some kilo on me, and as a consequence, the part of the information concerning the shape of the face may change, and so on. The last aspect, which is important in face recognition as well as in other biometry, is spoofing. I need to consider that, for example, I can take a picture of someone and show it to the camera, so trying to impersonate that person. If the biometric technique is not able actually to recognize the situation, I may be identified as the other person. So basically what I need to do in this case is to understand that I need to have a three-dimensional surface, not just a flat image. And looking to these characteristics, I can actually detect the possible forgery. How I can perform the recognition? Well, I can extract some basic feature locally or globally. I can have an holistic approach which look globally to some general characteristic of the face, and I can consider also hybrid approach in which I can identify some local specific characteristics, the shape, the position of the mouth, the nose, and some general characteristic of the entire region of the face. The current performances of the techniques for the face are pretty good, but more and more there are trends in research and practice which are trying to increase the accuracy, further increase the accuracy, especially when I'm working on the move or when I'm working in not really good environment with poor lighting, so that I may need to collect many more information in order to maintain a very high accuracy in the recognition. So now research is looking also to the periocular area, is trying to analyze the possible issues related to the age invariance. And in particular, there are several activities in the area of recognition of a face at a distance, or by using not only the visual wavelengths of the lights, but also the infrared or other type of information that we can collect with the various sensors. For fingerprint, we have similar characteristics. I mentioned that we need to consider as challenges the quality of the samples that we are capturing with possibly various devices. We need to take into account the possible damages that we have in the fingertip, and also we need to consider the various strategies that have been used for spoofing the information of the fingertip. And also in this case, there are various techniques to capture the characteristics and look to the various information to perform the recognition. For example, there is the high abstraction level is looking to the general direction of the ridges and valleys that we have on the fingertip. A more accurate approach is looking to the critical points where we have the convergence or the divergence of ridges and valleys, the minutiae I mentioned before. And more nowadays, we are looking in detail what we have on the surface of the fingertip. For example, there are pores also on the surface of the fingertip, and looking to the position of the pores, actually we can increase the accuracy and the details of the information that we are able to capture, and as a consequence, the recognition. There are many trends in research, not only in the direction of trying to use different strategies, the different types of features in order to overcome possible limits of one or the other technique. We are also doing research in the direction of making the modeling more robust and having the techniques which are able to learn directly from various images and extract information which are able to perform the characterization of the individual from the various samples. These techniques will be also directed to create approaches in less constrained with a less constrained strategy, so that we do not need to touch the devices, but we can use images collected by a regular camera, like the one of a computer or a smartphone, so that this will simplify much more what we can do with these devices. We already have some of these techniques implemented in many smartphones, but now the research is actually trying to be even more robust by considering the possible presence of dust, dirt, possible poor illumination, still being able actually to identify the fingertip. And we are also considering the opportunity of a three-dimensional fingerprint by using one camera only, so that, for example, by showing the fingertip and collecting several pictures, we can, with a stereo vision approach, we can recreate the three-dimensional view. In particular, research is directed both to the area of being less sensible to lighting and positioning, to possible distortion of the images, as well as in the direction of three-dimensional fingertip recognition, which avoid many practical issues. And there are several techniques, several methods that can be used to perform the contactless fingerprinting by using the three-dimensional reconstruction, the two-dimensional made three-dimensional by combining the information, and so on. We are doing research in the area of single view system or multiple view system, so that we can do some mosaicing to recreate the three-dimensional surface, as well as in the area of structured light. So we can add some structured light, we can project some structured light on the fingertip and get a better analysis of the surface, even if the individual is not too much cooperative. The advantages of these techniques, the combination of these techniques is very, very interesting nowadays. And in particular, what is more and more studied is the use of palm print as a supporting technique for with less constrained approaches, low resolution, but to complement the information that we are collecting, for example, for fingerprint, so that it is much more natural to collect from the same image not only the fingertip, but also the palm and maybe the shape of the palm itself. There are techniques which are focusing more and more on less constrained situation with less lighting, much more freedom in the positioning of the palm, so that this will be much more natural to be used in the real world applications. And what we are typically doing is to extract some specific features in some high-level characteristics, some some significant lines in the palm, and some more details related to the surface with the ridges and valleys that we have on the palm. In this case, the future trends are again the use of bidimensional techniques for camera, web, smartphone, and so on, or three-dimensional systems eventually with by using scanners or projecting structured light. And this will allow to increase the quality. In particular, one of the goals is to increase the quality of the three-dimensional reconstruction, so that on the three-dimensional model we can obtain a much higher quality recognition. For the iris, we have a similar situation. Basically, we need to deal with the low quality images. We need to take into account that a part of the image may be obstructed by eyelids or by the fact that we have some reflection and so on. So, and of course, we have spoofing also in this case. For the iris, we need to perform some, after the acquisition, we need to perform the segmentation and then to represent the iris in a structured way so that it will be much easier to perform the comparison. And the Dogman method is one of these typical approaches. The future trends are directed to consider less constrained acquisition with better segmentation techniques, so we can have a better analysis of the iris. And on the other side, there are a lot of studies focusing on the ability of recognizing the characteristics of the iris, even in the presence of dilated pupils or in reflection on the iris. What we need also to do more and more to avoid the problems with forgeries is to try to have a representation of the iris which can be cancelable, which can be replaced in the generation of the coding without the need of changing biometry, since we cannot change the iris of an individual. The research in particular is in the direction of less constrained, much more usable biometric collection techniques. In particular, is directed on getting images on the move while we are moving, and by taking into account possible occlusion, the position of the iris, the eye, and so on. This will allow to have a better quality of the images for of the information for each of the biometry. But if we really wanted to deal with partial biometry that we are able to collect, or in some cases low quality biometry, we may need to increase the number of biometries that we are considering at the same time, so that extracting some information from one, some other from the other, some one from the other, we can put together some amount of unique information which allow anyway to identify the individual. And this will increase the accuracy from one side, but also will increase the usability. So we can accept lower recognition capability in one biometry, since this is compensated by the presence of other additional information. And we can do the multi-biometric strategy in different ways. We can work at the level of the sensors, duplicating the sensors that we have, at the level of the traits, using different traits, face, fingerprint. We can work at the level of the instances, using different images of the same time, of the same type of biometry, using multiple samples, collecting more samples of the same biometry, or using different matchers, different techniques to extract the information that perform the match. For example, for the fingertip, we can consider the minutiae and the general distribution of the ridges and valley. Working at the sensor level, we perform the fusion very early in the process. We can work at the level of the feature, so we extract the feature for the same biometry in different ways, and then we perform the fusion. Or we can perform the merging at the level of the matching technique. So we perform the identification, we obtain the templates, and then we perform the merging of the multiple biometries. Or we can do it at the very end during the decision phase for the final identification. Basically, the trends that we have in this area concern the fact that we may consider new biometric modalities that we can put together, new sensor, new fusion techniques, and the goal is to be able to apply this technique more and more on mobile devices for advanced surveillance, so that we can provide on the base of these techniques many more services to the individuals and support better the monitoring of the environment. Of course, we need to take into account also the fact that we may have a spoofing of the biometry. So we may need to have appropriate anti-spoofing techniques, and the use of multiple biometries also help in this direction, since it is much more difficult to forge more than one biometry. The last very important aspect in real-world applications is the privacy. We need these biometries are really sensible information, so we need to protect the privacy of the biometry in a very strong way, in order to make sure that we limit the possible misuse of this information. But let's have a quick look at how we can really use these biometries in real-world applications and systems. We have the physical access control, for example, for critical area, public buildings, or banks, caveau, or transportation. We can use them for surveillance in buildings or public areas. We can use them in order to ensure, to control the logic access control to services on banking, supermarkets, e-commerce, the use of devices, cell phone or computers. But we can use them also in smart homes, so that we can adjust the behavior of the home the domotic system when we recognize the individuals who are in the home, so we can adjust the behavior to their preferences, and we can use the gesture to interact with the environment. Obviously, this nowadays may be limited due to the cost of these devices, but the more technology will become cheaper, the more these techniques can be deployed in the houses, as we have done with many other techniques, television or the computer. We can use them for smart entertainment, so that we can create a new experience by recognizing the individual, having a personal interaction with the games. So we can use in smart cars to adjust the behavior of the car to the driving style of the individual. We can use it in intelligent traffic management and in healthcare to adjust the behavior of the environment and the support to the specific needs of the people that we are recognizing. Which are the designing issues? This is the last aspect that I would like to talk about. We need to deal for the biometric system with many different technologies, since we need to deal with the sensor measurement system, the signal image processing. We need to perform data fusion. We need to perform classification and clustering in order to perform the match of the characteristics and as a consequence recognize the individual. But we need also to deal with database management, since we may have big databases that we need to analyze in order to perform the matching. We need to consider that we may have also distributed databases, especially when we have several databases managed by different entities that we need to put together. And in this case, we need to ensure communication, interoperability, and we need to take advantage of the opportunities of the infrastructure based on Internet of Things and cloud infrastructure. The last aspect that is essential to deal with is the security of privacy in order to protect the biometric data. How we can deal with all these aspects? In many cases, we are dealing separately nowadays, and this will limit the optimization and the usability of the components. What we need to do more and more is to have a comprehensive design methodology for our system. We need to put together the specification of all components and then consider the most appropriate techniques in order to deal with the various parts of our system. And we need to make the choice by considering not only the accuracy, and the cost, but we need to consider many other parameters like the scalability, the interoperability, security and privacy, which are important, as well as the speed of the use of these techniques. But we need also, when we need to deploy these technologies to the general public, we need also to consider the social acceptance of some of these techniques and the actual usability in the real world. So basically, the main comment, the main contribution that I would like to share with you is the fact that biometries can be really an opportunity to improve the quality of our application. Biometric is a set of technology which offer us an opportunity to design and implement effective, efficient techniques for to introduce adaptivity and create intelligent solutions for the smart living. Also by taking into account the need for privacy of these characteristics, of this information. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, I will be very happy to answer.
I request the participants to post your queries in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask. Okay, so there is a question from the participant. During COVID, which is good? That is the biometric techniques. Which is the better biometric techniques during the time of COVID?
Well, there is no single answer actually, since it depends on the specific application that we are considering. First of all, in the COVID situation, what is of paramount importance is to limit possible contacts with devices which are shared. So what we can do is, for example, consider if we are using the fingertip, the fingerprint to perform recognition, a good opportunity is to use contactless techniques to capture the fingertip, so that this will avoid to actually touch the sensors. Of course, we can consider sanitizing the sensors after every use, but still, if we are not sure about the accuracy of the sanitation, that may create anyway possible critical situation. Especially, we can consider sanitizing the devices, but if we have a bottle of sanitizer and then we take the bottle of sanitizer with one end and we put some sanitizer on the sensor, we sanitize the sensor, but we also have touched with the other end the bottle, which may have been touched by the other people before us. And as a consequence, we just moved the sanitation problem from the sensor to the bottle. So either we have someone sanitizing the sensor for us so that we do not need to touch anything personally, or still we have a possible problem. In this case, going touchless is something that will prevent all these kind of problems. Recognition of the face is actually another opportunity. The problem is that if we are still wearing masks in front of the camera, we may have a problem since we are hiding part of the face. How much face we actually need to perform the recognition? Well, that depends on how much we actually leave visible. It depends on the shape of the mask, how much is actually covering. If it is covering just a limited part, maybe the other redundant part are enough, but this is really not easy to predict a priori. There are researchers nowadays that are looking in these opportunities, recognition when we are wearing a mask, but still there are a lot of problems, especially if the mask is very big, covering very well the nose, the mouth, and the lower part of the face. Iris is one opportunity to collect a biometry without the need of touching the sensor, since that is performed by using a camera. And as a consequence, that will be another interesting alternative with respect to face recognition. Using the scanning of the retina, that is another option, but you need to have a real cooperation of the individual, since the individual needs to go near to the scanner, very near to the scanner, and is necessary to have the scanner projecting the light in the eyes and collecting the image. And this may be feasible if I have, for example, the recognition at the border control, but it's definitely not really usable if I have a regular environment. If I have to protect a very secured area, for example, a caveau of the bank, or another environment where I need to protect some items which are stored in that environment. I may ask the employees or people who are entering the area to use the scanning of the retina, but that, as I said, requires that I go rather near to the sensor, and the cost of the sensor is not really marginal. So it depends how much I would like to accept as cost with respect to the accuracy and the limited forgery that I may want to have for the individual biometry. And as noted in the chat, the use of multimodal biometrics actually can help, since I can put together different biometries that I can collect in the very less constrained way, so that I can have maybe not both iris really visible. I may have part of the face visible. I may show the fingertip, maybe not in a very good way, but putting everything together, I can have enough information which are unique of that specific individual. And as a consequence, I can perform the identification of that individual.
Thank you, sir. There is
Thank
one
you very
more
much,
query.
sir. And may I take, I have a question. This is something relating to a voice-based recognition of a home automation. And the critics of automation use that as a way to comment too much automation spoils our lives. They take an example of an individual who goes out of the home before dental procedures, and he comes back and the weather is not so good and there's noise, and the doors won't open, it's only actuated by voice, and he cannot speak properly because he had a dental procedure. And I mean, that's a jokes apart. I think the point that you mentioned has a lot of virtues, such as not depending on a single point of failure, but take multiple sources, and also allow for the dynamism so that people cannot easily spoof, because by combining all these multiple inputs, we would have a stubborn evidence against any spoofing. Thank you so much for enlightening us, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments. I really agree on them.
So there is one more query. Considering the largest set of verified data set, which is the best biometrics?
I already answered, if I remember correctly.
Sir, I'm going to repeat the question. There is a query from audience. Considering the largest set of verified data set, which is the best biometrics?
Well, basically is what I said before. There is not a best biometry in general. It depends on the specific application I want to address. It depends on the specific application, which is the level of accuracy for that specific application. And from this depends on the choice of the biometry, depends on the specific characteristics I can collect, with which I can collect that biometry. It depends on the type of the sensors, the quality of the sensors, the way in which I collect contact or contactless that biometry. That will define which is the minimum level that I can accept for that biometry. And if that is not enough, I need to add more biometry or change the biometry and look for another one which is much more unique for the individuals. The fact that the database is large, in which I need to check for the recognition is large or not is not influencing the type of biometry I'm going to choose. Since what is important is the accuracy of the recognition I can have for that type of biometry. Of course, if I have 3-4 individuals that I need to recognize, for example, to open the door of the room, and these individuals have pretty different fingertip, for example, I can use a poor collection of the fingertip to identify who among the 4 individuals is entering in the house. The problem is that if there are in the city other people who have pretty similar fingertip and the quality of recognition is low, even if I have in the database of my application just the 4 fingertip I wanted to recognize, if the quality of the collection of the data and the comparison is low, I may allow other people to enter in the room. So what is important is not just the size of the database in which I need to do the recognition, but is the accuracy I do want to have in the recognition. For the specific application, I need to set the threshold for the matching action. So the highest is the accuracy in the recognition, the highest has to be the threshold. Well, I see that there are other questions related to for the fingerprints to possible cuts, scrapes. Yes, they can create problems since if I damage the surface of the fingerprint with the scraps, cuts, or like, for example, happens for workers in the field who are working in agriculture. For them, it is easy that they do not have a good fingerprint that is almost completely unreadable from the point of view of the recognition, and as a consequence is useless. If I have a few cuts on a fingertip, if I use multiple fingerprints, well, the probability that a cut in a fingertip damages one of the fingertip and as a consequence does not me allow to have the recognition is overcome by the fact that I'm using all the other information on the other fingerprint. There are some, another question is, are the fingerprints changing when we became older? Well, the fingerprint per se, not really, are the damages to the fingertips that may create a problem changing the quality of the fingerprint. What is changing in a much more visible way is, for example, the face. For the iris, we may have some illnesses which are damaging the iris, and as a consequence, we lose the capability of collecting enough. We may lose the capability of collecting enough information from the iris. There are questions about the iris. Well, the iris scan is the iris scanning danger for the eye? Well, basically, when I do the iris scanning, I'm not using laser or other dangerous light. I'm just projecting some light in on the iris, and I'm collecting just the picture of the iris. So there is no additional issue related to the collection of the iris. And the iris is changed by possible surgery. Well, it depends what the surgery is actually touching in the eye. If I have, for example, cataract, which is making not transparent the crystalline, and I'm replacing the crystalline, the iris is not changing at all, since basically what the surgeon is doing is to cut around and insert the new lenses after having removed the crystalline. So basically, I'm not changing the stripes in the iris. Of course, if I'm cutting part of the eye, if I'm damaging, sorry, if I have an illness which is making a part of the iris losing the original stripes, there are some of the illnesses which create white spots around that may reduce the ability of recognizing an individual by using the iris. I do not see. No, I do not see other questions now. I hope that I answered to all questions. Sorry, but they were popping up in the chat, so I hope that I have not missed any of them.
So there's one
So
more
there's
query.
another.
Yes, Arpita, please go ahead.
Yeah, it is what is the minimum expected resolution of any biometric image?
Depends on the biometry. There is no single answer. The higher is the resolution of the image, the better I can extract the specific feature from the image for that specific biometry, but it depends on the specific biometry.
Thank you, sir. If there's any more doubts, please feel free to unmute yourself or put it out in the chat box. If there are none, thank you, sir, for clarifying all the doubts and for a very enlightening informative session. As we near the end
Thank
of our
you.
webinar, I would like to, as we near the end of our webinar, I would like to convey our deepest gratitude to Dr. Vincenzo Piuri, who took the time to share his knowledge and experience with all of us. I know I speak for everyone when I say you ignited a spark of curiosity and opened an avenue for further learning into everything you've taught us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank
We'd
you.
now like to take a moment to present Dr. Piuri with a word memento.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate. And again, thank you for the kind invitation. It has been a pleasure.
Oh, there's
Madam,
another
one query
question.
here. Hello. Hello. Hello, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think someone is asking question. Thank you.
Sorry.
I think someone is asking the question, I think.
Yeah, let me
Yes, sir.
read.
He asks,
Bindu,
is there
Bindu madam, yeah, one query is there, madam.
a risk with brain scan?
Well, The vein scanners are basically infrared light, so there is no special risk to observe by using this type of approach. And the fingerprint sensor carry diseases. Well, it depends what you mean. The fingerprints, if you mean that I may have viruses deposited or bacteria deposited on top of the fingerprint sensor, yes. As on any other surface that may be touched by individuals who are carrying possible diseases. Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
The question is something like, when we touch the door scanner, will it carry diseases?
Well, as I said, whenever I touch any handle of any door with or without a scanner, if anyone who has illnesses touched exactly the handle, I will touch exactly a surface where that person may have deposited possible illnesses. But that happens whenever I go around. If I go on a bus, if I go in any place and I touch surfaces that may have been touched by other people, if the other people has any disease which is transmittable by touch, these people may have deposited viruses or bacteria on the surface, and if I touch the surface in a short time before these viruses or bacteria are destroyed, I may be infected. But that happens independently of the COVID situation. It may happen independently from the fact that what I'm touching is a sensor. And this is also one of the reasons for which more and more, to avoid touching devices, is stimulating the study of techniques which are touchless, so that we do not need to touch the sensor. I do not see any other question in the chat now.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
It has been a pleasure again. Thank you. Have a good night. Namaste.
We'd like to. I'd like to ask for a group picture, please.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you once again. Yeah, many of them are turning on their videos. There are many people who have joined the webinar, and I'm sure it was definitely very fruitful, Professor. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you once again. Good evening to you too. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Madam, Bindu madam, actually last.
Yes.
Hello. Madam, last time I attended the webinar organized by you last week.
Yeah.
Actually, that link is missed by me, but to fill up that form.
You didn't get the link, Professor?
No, madam. Yeah, last time.
Please. Okay. Just send me a message. I will help you with that.
Madam, your
Thank
number.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Madam, number, madam.
I'll connect to you just. Yeah, offline I'll connect you. I know your name.
Yeah, okay, ma'am. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Also like to take a moment to thank Bindu ma'am for being a pillar of support in organizing today's session. Thank you, ma'am. And a very sincere thank you to Dr. Parameshachari sir for the support and guidance he extended to all of us. Thank you, sir. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all the Exicom members for their support and encouragement. And last but not the least, a very hearty thanks to all the coordinators, volunteers, and participants who made today's event a success. We hope all of you took away valuable lessons from today's session, support and encouragement that you extended to us today and all the future initiatives. Thank you all once again and have a great evening. Thank you.